Welcome back to the DDT Method podcast. And before we go into all the introductions and all of the what we're going to be talking about today I'm going to start right off the bat with the most compelling question I've ever asked somebody to start off a podcast. Fuck, marry, kill. Increlex, DNP, Megadose SLU.
Ooh, okay. Well, yeah, I'm going to answer from my personal perspective because I honestly had zero clients do any of the above. So I don't have experience with other people necessarily using any of those compounds, but I have used all of those compounds personally. I would say if I had to marry one, honestly, Increlex, because I think that it probably has the least amount of negative side effects compared to the other two. And people could talk about some of the cancer things around IGF-1 for sure. I do definitely think that is a concern. But if we are going to be talking about something like SLU, which isn't necessarily studied in a medical setting, or DMP, which does have the propensity to actually kill you past a certain dose, and obviously not something that you can necessarily run super long term, I would say Increlex would probably be my sort of marry in that situation where I'm assuming it's going to be something that I'm going to be using more long term. And honestly, my results with Increlex have been really, really good this past run. It's the first time I've done it. It's about 2 months into the actual Increlex cycle. And honestly, it's the most insulin sensitive I've ever stayed without using insulin, without using GDAs, and while eating 7,000 calories a day, which is absolutely insane. It got to the point where my coach, Justin Compton, basically told me to get a cheat meal every single day because he would add in 100 grams of carbs, 35 grams of fat pretty much every single week for about the past 4 or 5 weeks. And I would still drop weight while using the Increlex, which is absolutely insane. And that's the only difference of what I've been doing this off season compared to other off seasons.
When you don't look like you're holding a bunch of water or anything either. So it's just like you got the beard now, the full beard, but it's not like you're bloated. Not that I can tell, at least.
That's funny. I actually just had a conversation with my buddy Mike Nassif just yesterday, and I was like, yeah, this is the first time I felt like I've ever been in a growth phase. I haven't felt super bloated or super watery or anything like that. People talk about LR3, being a compound that could have the propensity to hold more water, than other, IGF-1, like, IGF does, probably since it's so short acting, doesn't necessarily have that same propensity as LR3 to hold water. But Increlex, from my experience and the people that I've talked to, it doesn't really seem to be a compound that holds too much water weight. And I also do think this offseason, I've also done other things around reducing inflammation, especially around my diet. In particular, even the cheat meals that I do choose is like sushi or a kava. It's not just, going out to Five Guys every single night and just, pounding burgers and fries and super inflammatory foods like that as well. So I think a combination of those factors have led me to be the leanest I've been at the heaviest I've ever been while eating the most food I've ever been, honestly. So I'd say Increlex is really something that is becoming a little bit more available. It's something that in the past, it was seen as a compound that was impossible to get. But I've talked to multiple individuals. It does seem like it's something that's coming back on the market and being something that's more readily available for a considerable amount of people. So I would say if we're going to be on the lookout for things coming out in 2026 that more people are going to be able to experiment with, that's not necessarily just a fat loss peptide like we did back in 2024, 2025, where we had Retta, the GLPs, the MOTCs, the SLUs. Well, now we're having this kind of new age of peptide experimentation where things are kind of diving into more of the muscle building realm. And obviously these things aren't necessarily going to be at the point where they're going to compare to anabolic steroids by any means. But if we can, kind of leverage these things that are about, 2 to 5%ers, I like to call them, where it's not something that's just going to blow, just results out the door, but it's going to add a little bit more to your actual process as a whole and fit in synergistically with the other things that you're doing in your cycle. I think that these things could have a lot of potential going forward, especially the more research we're doing on things like myostatin, on IGF, and all of these other pathways that aren't necessarily explored by just anabolics alone. To kind of finish off the question in terms of what I would kill, it's kind of hard to choose between the two. Me personally, I've had a good experience with DMP. And I know a lot of people haven't said that, and maybe that's a little bit taboo to say on the internet because a lot of people do demonize that compound. But truthfully, I ran it on my last prep, and we went up to 400 milligrams per day. And that was something where I didn't experience any heat. I didn't experience any fatigue, any training performance loss, and I, was losing fat at a pretty considerable rate. I went from 250 down to 180 during that prep. So I did lose about 70 pounds through that entire prep process throughout 16 weeks. And I do believe the DMP allowed me to get there with pushing a little bit less hard than what I would have needed to, and gotten a little bit more stringy than what I would have done in the past. So a lot of people do say DMP could lead to muscle loss. And a lot of people do say DMP does give you a little bit of a worse look while you're on it. And for sure, you do hold water on it because you are going through oxidative stress. But throughout that process, I do feel like it led to a very, very, very good result for me personally. And it would probably be something that I am a little bit more comfortable deploying with myself based on previous results. Now, I have done the very high dose SLU as well. I would have to say, I'm a little bit less impressed than what a lot of other people have felt with some of the higher dose SLU experiments out there. I haven't gotten what other people claim in terms of it being like this crazy fat loss, sort of compound that's like blowing everything out of the water and like the next best thing. I really don't feel like I got much more out of 500 milligrams than I did 500 micrograms, to be honest with you, in terms of fat loss, actual results. If anything, I felt hotter on the SLU than I actually did the DMP as a whole. And I felt a little bit worse. I did feel a little bit more kind of fatigued. It was kind of like this weird feeling if you've ever smoked a lot of THC earlier in the day, and you
Oh yeah.
kind of felt like a little bit more brain foggy towards the end of the day. That's what the higher dose SLU did make me feel like. So if I had to pick one to kill, I would say the higher dose SLU, and I would fuck the DMP.
Nice. Good way to break that down. Hey guys, this is Drew Donaldson, and you're watching the DDT Method podcast. Before we get rolling on this week's amazing episode, I want to take a quick moment and tell you about the DDT Method School Group. If you support our podcast and you want to continue to do so and help us grow, the DDT Method School Group is the best way to do that. It's only $10 per month, but there's at time of recording over 50 exclusive videos breaking down peptides with deep dives, going over courses, dosages, and different cycles of peptides, PEDs, supplements, as well as articles and information on training and nutritional approaches as well. This is where we can talk about absolutely anything unfiltered, and we're building an amazing community of like-minded individuals coming from the worlds of biohacking, longevity, bodybuilding, getting as big as humanly possible, getting as lean as humanly possible. There's just a ton of information and a ton of really cool discussion. And again, those over 50 exclusive videos on PEDs, peptides, protocols, you name it. It's all there in the DDT Method School Group. Now back to the show. I'll touch on a little bit of that really quickly, then we'll swing back. So SLU, I can't say that I don't notice any real difference in moving doses around, but I notice 1 milligram to 4 milligrams because I experimented within that realm. And then I very quickly titrated up to 20, which I'm doing right now. And 20 is definitely more noticeable in terms of my results than the 1 to 4 milligram range. 1 to 4 milligrams compared to 500 micrograms, and then even 500 micrograms compared to 20 milligrams, I literally feel no different.
Yeah.
I definitely know that running it in isolation, just with normal diet and training, I definitely notice a quicker rate of fat loss on even 1 milligram.
Yeah.
I didn't notice much of an increase steadily going up to 4 milligrams. And then I just started like doubling it till I got to 20 because I had 20 milligram capsules. At 20, I notice I'm still dropping fat a little bit quicker than I would otherwise, I believe. I think it's a little bit more substantial than it is on 1 to 4 milligrams. I'm not dieting super hard. I have my caloric range. My macros change based on what I'm doing that day. And I'm sweating more now, but no difference in energy. I don't feel any different. And maybe it's because I'm deploying all the mitochondrial support stuff. I don't know. But I tend to agree. Now, Results wise, definitely noticeable, but I agree with you, not a game changer. So it's not something where I'm like, this is the most insane thing of all time, but it will, in my experience, speed up the process. But I've seen that process speed up in clients at 500 micrograms to 1
Yep.
milligram as well. So I'm not saying there's no use case for mega doses. I'm just saying there's some sort of variable here, either an individual metabolism, it could be ERR receptor density, but it's all over the place, which is wild. Increlex, I haven't tried yet. I've tried every type of IGF available, but Increlex is still, it's on the very small list of things I haven't run. And unfortunately, DNP is also on that list. So
Yeah.
I will divert to you and then the experience of my other peers to form my opinions thereof. And there are also things that I generally won't run with people either because I don't have the experience with it. Increlex, I feel like I could navigate. DNP, I probably wouldn't navigate with anybody without the personal experience with it. And high dose SLU, I have had a few people that have wanted to do it, similar to the new follistatin. Don't have personal experience, but I understand it. But let's ride and see what happens. We'll use it as a case study, and I just disclose that right off the bat. Before we go any deeper, Tom Schuster, tell me about yourself, because we know that you have a kick-ass podcast. We know that you're an emerging coach on the scene that's going everywhere between biohacking and bodybuilding and everywhere in between. We definitely, if somebody's watching this show, they probably know who you are. If not, first and foremost, subscribe to Tom's podcast because it's Tom's version of what I try to do also, which is just bring on the best of absolutely every realm and facet of the fitness industry. Highly, highly recommended. But Tom, what got you started on this and why have you gone in the direction that you're going right now?
Awesome. So I'll try to be a master of brevity with my own story. But in terms of where it all started, I grew up in a bunch of different countries. My dad was a businessman, but he was not a very good businessman. Loved the man to death, but he made a lot of bad financial decisions that ended up us in some bad situations as a kid. And through that, I really did not necessarily have a good. I didn't necessarily love fitness, to be honest with you. I hated physical activity. I remember the first time my dad tried to take me to the gym, I cried my eyes out. But that's how bad I hated physical activity growing up. But eventually, through some life things that happened, we ended up moving over to the United States. And still through that process, I was still a fat kid that loved playing video games, loved playing Pokemon, loved eating McDonald's, but absolutely hated working out. Now, throughout that process, I got into basketball slightly, but it was more so something just to keep my parents happy that I was in some sort of physical activity versus something that I necessarily loved. But throughout the process, I did love the hard work aspect and the gym aspect of it throughout, just going through, feeling how I felt, feeling a little bit different, feeling more energetic. And eventually that kind of came to a halt one day when I woke up at 16 years old. I had a swelling in my left leg, and pretty much the swelling was what you could imagine, some of the worst swelling you would ever imagine waking up overnight with. It was like my leg looked like a balloon. And I went to the doctor the first time and they said it was what did they say it was? It was IT band syndrome. That's what they said it was. So they had me foam roll pretty much every single day. And if anybody knows anything about a DVT blood clot, you don't want to stretch with it, and you do not want to mess around and start poking around on that specific area because it could get loose. Now, through that, eventually it kept getting worse and worse. No surprise there. And I did eventually end up in the emergency room with one of the biggest blood clots that they've ever seen in a pediatric case. It was all the way from the ankle to my groin. They said if I had gone in, maybe a few days later to even a week later, that this leg would have been completely amputated 100%. And through that process, I went through surgeries multiple times per week. I was in the hospital for over 2 weeks doing pretty much some sort of surgery every single day. And lucky enough, that was a time period where they came up with a very niche sort of new surgery where they would stick a tube into your actual veins and start sucking out the blood clot, which is something that they really hadn't done in a pediatric case up until that point. So through that, I ended up out of the hospital, 5'7", 105 pounds, and just feeling so horrible about myself. I was on a wheelchair for pretty much 6 months, going to high school every single day, and just felt so insecure. And eventually I started reading books because you can only play so many video games before you're brain feels fried. And my dad loved going to Barnes and Nobles, and that was pretty much the only place I would go, leave the house to go to because I felt so embarrassed about the way that I looked. But through reading books, through reading different personal development stuff, I started developing a new mindset towards this and started treating this as like a problem that it was given to me in my life to solve. It was something that happened. I shifted my perspective of this was something that happened to me to something that happened for me. And for that, I eventually picked up Arnold's Encyclopedia Bodybuilding, and from that point onwards, I was just pretty much hooked. And through that, I started searching up different things on the internet regarding fitness, diet, supplementation. Eventually, I started figuring out, is there things that I could actually do to help with this blood clot situation, help me gain strength back in this leg? Because I was told I would never be able to squat heavy again. I would never be able to deadlift heavy again. I would pretty much be limited to doing the bike 30 minutes per day. And that's pretty much it. And that's pretty much what they told me the extent of my physical activity was going to be for the rest of my life, was just cardio on a bike. And I just was not willing to accept that. So through that, eventually I came through, discovered different supplements, discovered different things I could be doing, therapies, and things like that. And throughout the years, I eventually was able to come off my blood thinning medication 100%, 100% clearance of the clot, and managed to gain full strength back in the leg. The only difference that you can really, really notice is one calf is slightly bigger than the other. The calf that had the blood clot in is slightly bigger than the other. But besides that, you would probably never be able to tell that I had a blood clot in that leg. But through that, I eventually went to college, went to the University of Tampa, and I was kind of really, really set on making something in regards to health and fitness part of my career. Through that, I met Christopher Bearcat. He really introduced me to the Human Performance Lab at University of Tampa. And that's pretty much where I spent all my free time. If I wasn't studying or if I wasn't with my friends going out and partying, I was in that lab just learning and just talking with everybody in there, from Will Farapon, who I'm sure you know as well, who was back in MI40 back in the day. And he was a person who connected me to Zach Sod. Zach Sod connected me to Ben Pekulski, and eventually I started working at MI40 Gym. Throughout there, I met a bunch of individuals who I absolutely admire to this day. Jordan Shallows, to multiple different individuals who I eventually connected with for learning, for education, because again, I was set on making something in regards to fitness my career, but I still wasn't sure what. Throughout that process, I did eventually get a couple people who were interested in following along my journey as well. They're interested as well as gaining some knowledge in terms of what I offered in terms of meal plans. I was like, never done a meal plan before, don't know what that is, but I can give you some idea of what to eat at the cafe at the university, right? So my first actual client was my roommate's girlfriend in college, and she basically hit me up for like a workout program and a meal plan out of the cafe. Eventually, she referred me to a bunch of different people who were friends, and I was just doing all their diets for free because I didn't necessarily know coaching was a job at that time. But throughout that process, eventually I did get enough people asking me to where I was like, this could be a pretty good side hustle to get some free drinks, or quote unquote free drinks at like a bar or anything where I go out. So I started charging people for meal plans, started charging people for coaching eventually, and eventually that became my job. As soon as I graduated college, I was 100% full-time coaching, working at MI40. I was also working at a clinic, working with type 2 diabetics for their actual diet, and just try to give them a little bit more education on how they can manage type 2 diabetes throughout their life, and eventually hopefully put it in some type of remission and actually solve that type 2 diabetes, which we actually did with a few individuals, where we gave them a good solid diet plan. They lost 50, 60 pounds, and eventually were able to come off their metformin and whatever they were prescribed at that time for diabetes. Now, with that, eventually I did manage to go full-time coaching. I competed myself. I've gone from 105 pounds when I first started lifting weight, right after that injury. I'm now 255 pounds. So I've gained over 150 pounds of body weight. And throughout the process, I've just done different things, like gone through my own gut health journey. I've gone through my own, sort of leaving bodybuilding, going to martial arts and jujitsu. So I've tried so many different things alongside the journey. I've connected with so many different individuals. A lot of people ask me, what is your coaching niche? And I like to say I really don't know because it's so weird having to answer that question when you're working with somebody who's 260 pounds trying to get to stage, and then the next check-in you do, it's a 135-pound woman who's dealing with some sort of perimenopausal symptoms, and the next person you come to is a 185-pound kid who just fucked himself up with gear, and now he has some sort of autoimmune issues in regards to acne that you're solving. So I don't really necessarily have a niche. I like to say that I'm a problem solver. This journey started with me solving my own problem, and ever since then, I've just been passionate about helping others solve, their problems. So that's how I ended up in this position.
It's so funny because there's so many similar stories, but at the same time, not that many, where somebody's almost origin story to becoming so multifaceted starts with some sort of like health event in their life and something that they had to deal with, or multiple events that they had to deal with. And I find a lot of similarity between some of the most intelligent people and some sort of like, this is what kind of pushed me forward to do this type situation. Now, working in a realm that's so multifaceted, and I can say this because I face and see a lot of the same things. We have so many different situations that we deal with. So, for the lens of today's discussion, let's kind of assume that we're not talking about any specific issues. We're not talking about anybody coming in with any sort of dysbiosis or any sort of injury or autoimmune or prior issues that we need to go in and correct. And let's just look at this through the general lens that I tend to do a lot on this show. And I'm sure your stuff is so multifaceted that you tend to do this as well. I've noticed. We'll look at this through the looking glass at a person that is male or female and already in good shape. I don't want to make this kind of an intro episode, so I apologize for anybody that's looking for foundational stuff. But somebody that's, a dude that's of good size, carries some good muscle, could be 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s. And we'll leave out like exclusive issues that come with age or whatnot. And we'll just say that they're doing everything right. They have a good diet. There's variety in there. Their sleep architecture is at least decent. They're recovering, they're training. They're not training like idiots or assholes. And the same avatar for a female. And let's say it's somebody that doesn't necessarily want to say, fuck it all. I want to get on stage and look insane. But it's not somebody that says, like, I don't care what I look like. I just want to be healthy. We want somebody that wants to maximize health and performance, but also the phrase that I use for it, you want to be a little bit of a cartoon character. You want to go to the beach and have people go, what the fuck? Or you want to even walk around, people don't go to malls anymore, but you want to walk around Target and in a t-shirt, somebody's saying, whoa, holy crap, male or female. So let's look towards that person that's already decent at this stuff, but it's like there's so much high level information coming in. And you, like myself, get to speak to so many experts. It's like we have this constant, like, weekly consult call with a different expert. It feels like fucking highway robbery. It's nuts.
Yeah.
But in pulling in all the information that you've pulled in and how you've adapted it and put your spin on it and dug into it further and maybe taken your own approach to XYZ, let's go with that guy that's, he's run a few cycles. There's no particular issues to speak of. And when you're talking to him about the general, like, hey, what have you responded well to in the past? Oh, like pretty much everything. He's just basically a clean slate. It's like the old WWF video game, create a wrestler, and you haven't done anything to him yet.
Yep.
This guy wants to be super lean, super big, just wants to maximize everything. Where do you start? And with all of the options that we have for compound selection, gear, different pillars of gear, test, DHTs, 19 NORs, peptides, small molecules, all the fringe stuff, all the recovery technology, all the fucking wild shit that we're into, for a guy that's in good shape but wants to be in holy shit shape, how do you start piecing this together?
So at first, like you talked about, obviously we want to make sure that I'm going to assume that blood work is in check. I'm going to assume that this guy is just 100% healthy. We don't have to do, or already did all the original screening and he's 100% on point with everything. Now, with that being said, from here on, I'll first start off with just testosterone and growth hormone for this individual. I want to see how you just respond to that. Even if you've told me how you respond in the past, I am a person who is very hesitant to just take people's anecdotal word for things just just as it is. I like to do a little bit of testing on its own. It doesn't have to be, oh, we're going to be doing testosterone for an entire year, marking down every single symptom and every single thing that you feel, and then just putting, full comprehensive guide of how you respond to testosterone, right? But maybe for the first 2 weeks, I'll have you on an elevated dose of testosterone and growth hormone. From there, if the person's looking to pack on a little bit more muscle, I like to go the Equipoise route. The reason being is I usually 9 times out of 10 really do feel like Equipoise tends to produce a little bit more results than some of the DHT derivatives in terms of actually building muscle. People could talk about nitrogen retention. They could talk about the elevated hematocrit and red blood cell count and how that could lead to better endurance during training. Whatever reason people like to theorize, I love to go down those rabbit holes as well. But in terms of what I actually see play out in practical application, Equipoise almost always seems to be as mild in terms of actual side effects with individuals. Obviously, just having to manage the actual hematocrit side of things, which is fairly easy to do in this day and age with the actual tools that we do have. I don't necessarily think that we even need to go the blood donation route with Equipoise itself. I do believe we could use things like IP6. We could use things like Xarelto, which is actual very mild blood thinner that you could actually use to actually reduce hematocrit with individuals at a very low dose. And, all of those things are things that we can actually do to actually keep the Equipoise from expressing some of its side effects itself. So testosterone, Equipoise, I really like to use those two things in combination. Now, if we're going to be talking about, throwing in a third compound, if we are going that route, MPP, but we don't necessarily have to. MPP or DECA, I should say, but we don't necessarily have to with that individual. It really just depends on what that individual's body is like. I like to look at, people love to talk about individual somatotypes and how, there's no such thing as like an ectomorph or endomorph or a mesomorph. But I'm not going to necessarily say I categorize people in those specific categories, but I do tend to see commonalities between people and what their history is in terms of what epigenetically has happened to them. Were you the fat kid growing up? Were you the skinny kid that couldn't gain weight growing up? What is your body right now? Are you the guy who's holding a little bit more water? Is a little bit more of that wider frame structure? Maybe you don't necessarily need something like an MPP because it's something that is going to fill out that frame a little bit more. Maybe we just stick to something like an Equipoise that's just going to be a little bit more mild in terms of actual water retention as a whole, so I can actually see what's happening with your physique. Because I think the problem when we start throwing a lot of water retentive compounds at an individual who tends to hold a little bit more water is that we start to get to the point where lines start blurring. And I don't like to necessarily see that as a coach, because it starts to, no pun intended, blur the lines between what is actual water gain and what is actual muscle mass as a whole. For me, my biggest tool isn't the subjective feedback. It isn't all of these different, metric tracking tools or anything. It's what's actually happening to the physique itself. Because if the goal is to improve the physique, I could care about the scale. I could care about anything else. If your arms look bigger and you're the same weight, well, we just grew your arms, dude. Like there's nothing that we can necessarily say to kind of take away from that. If we're going to be using, measurements, I love to use things like body weight measurements as a whole to kind of track progress as a whole. I love to use things like resting heart rate. Love to use things like, HRV. I love to use things like blood pressure, blood glucose, all these different tracking things within my coaching. But at the end of the day, I want to see what's happening to your physique. And I do see trends within individuals who are a little bit more of the ectomorph side of things to respond a little bit better to actual MPP and DECA if they can handle it from a mental side effects standpoint. And same thing with Equipoise. It's very rare that I do see people have the reported anxiety out there, because I've honestly have yet to have anybody experience a super crazy anxiety with using Equipoise. But I do know it happens. I have heard other people in my friend group that have said, hey, I've used Equipoise before, gave me crazy anxiety. I'm not going to touch it again. Cool. If you're a person who can't handle MPP, you can't handle Equipoise, we can for sure go Mastron. We can for sure go Primobolan. But for me personally, the way I like to structure things, especially in a growth phase, is testosterone, is Equipoise, is growth hormone. From there, if we are going to be talking about the peptide route, I really don't like using more than 3 peptides at once at a specific use case. Reason being is, yes, if a person can afford everything under the sun, for sure, maybe we could go 4 or 5 peptides max. But for most individuals that come to me, they're people who aren't necessarily looking to break the bank, right? They're not necessarily people who are just looking to absolutely spend every single dollar on like gaining the 1 or 2% on these peptides. They're coming to me because they want a fully optimized routine, knowing that they're doing everything within this actual routine as a whole to get the results that they want. They're not people who are looking to spend $500 on 5 amino. They're not people who are looking to spend 2 grand on Increlex. They're not looking for any of those crazy niche compounds. They're people who are looking for just solid results around, and just kind of like the avatar you talked about. Now, are we going to be, to kind of refer back to this question, is this individual looking to get the most results possible, or are they a person who we're going to say is a little bit more of like a realistic kind of situation, to where they have a certain amount of budget that they can spend?
Hey guys, this is Drew from the past interrupting Drew from the future. It might actually be Drew from the future interrupting Drew from the past. I'm not 100% sure, but at the end of the day, yes, I'm putting a commercial in my own video, and I'm sure that YouTube has already hammered you guys with a bunch of random commercials for some pretty weird shit, but that's based on your algorithm. That's not my fault. This one is my fault though, but I just want to take a quick second and remind you guys about the DDT Method School Group. The DDT Method School Group is just $10 per month, but you can contribute to helping the podcast grow just by becoming a member. And when you're in, there's over 50 exclusive videos and articles, and I'm releasing more every week. That's 50 at the time of recording. If you're watching this later, there's probably well over 100, maybe even 200. There's a ton of content in there, regardless of when you jump in, and there's an amazing community of like-minded individuals as well. If you love the DDT Method podcast and you want to support us and continue to be able to watch us grow, this is the best way you can do it. The DDT Method School Group. Information down below somewhere. Again, I'm bad at this. Too many commercials. Back to the show. Somebody will comment, this is crazy. This is so expensive, but fuck that guy. Let's go for everything most results possible, because that opens up an interesting door, because as you mentioned, there's so many cases where people will want to take 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 things. So I really want to kind of hammer home that doing everything to move every lever and to leave no stone unturned doesn't mean using all of the peptides, because what we have here now is because peptides get so much coverage because they work, and what work means is subjective. Work doesn't mean they work like Trenbolone, but work doesn't mean they work like old muscle tech products from the early 2000s. They do what they do, and they do it well. And every single day, and I say this as somebody that makes educational peptide content, people make more and more educational peptide content. It's easy because they copy each other or they chat GPT it, and they're not putting an original thought in it. So we have thousands upon thousands of posts going up every single day across various platforms of social media talking about how awesome every single peptide is. And unfortunately, it usually ties into some sort of coupon code. I'm not damning that. I have tons of coupon codes. I don't post them publicly, and I'm not technically damning that, even though I think that is not the best way to go about it, especially if it's an individual that doesn't know how they work and shouldn't be really promoting them beyond the I like this type situation. But that's a whole other rant. But because of this, what we end up having is we have full-grown adults that are treating peptides like we did when we were kids just getting into this. And I say we, which is ironic because I'm significantly older than you. You have youth on your side. I do not. But situationally, it's kind of like when you start buying supplements and you believe that everything is amazing and that like alpha lipoic acid is essentially insulin, and tribulus is like 2 grams a test, and like creatine is Increlex and whatever the hell not. And we go out and buy everything. You have the giant supplement cabinet or shelf or whatnot. And you're taking 75,000 pills a day. And it's ironic because in this day and age, we kind of laugh at that. But then motherfuckers are doing it with peptides.
Yeah.
So it's literally doing it. Now, I don't set the best example. I think I probably have 80% of every commercially available peptide in my house right now. I'm going to get robbed by like the coolest motherfucker on the
Exactly.
planet. But situationally, I have them all. And I will use quite a bit over the course of the week, but I have maybe 4 or 5 things that I'll keep in a regular rotation. And I'm also very aware of acute benefits and different situations where I can take one thing maybe just once or twice a week. One thing I might take once a month. One I might take every other week. But it's a weird mix of I'm very well versed in it. I have access to many, many things. And also, I just think it's fucking cool. I'm not expecting to make some tremendous change because I tried a bolus dose of growth hormone once a week for a month. I'm just seeing what happens based on how I know things happen. So, diverting back and not straying away too much from the original question, let's see how we would piece it together for the person that comes to you and says, I have an unlimited budget. I want to look like a complete cartoon character. I don't want to be detrimental to my health. I don't want to look like a Mr. Olympia cartoon character, but I definitely want to be the biggest guy at the gym that doesn't look like he's about to die of a heart attack. So I think I'm painting a picture of reasonable health, and if not improved health, if you think that's possible to still push that while looking like a complete cartoon character.
Yeah.
But let's leave no stone unturned and see how you would navigate that without just taking everything on the planet. Because I know you're not going to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So originally, I did say I don't like to use more than 3 peptides at once. Now, that's in general with most individuals. Now, there are certain use cases where people do come to my door. Like I just mentioned, there's a kid that came to my door who had crazy autoimmune related acne, and we had to do some things in regards to keeping the autoimmunity dormant while we were kind of fixing the acne and then eventually fixing the acne scarring. And through that, we did have to use more than 3 peptides. But if we're going to be talking about this individual, it's going to be on an as needed basis, right? I'm never going to be a person who's just going to say, yeah, we're going to be using this and this just because it's a good thing. It's like, okay, do we need to actually use this thing, and what benefit are we actually looking to get out of using this specific thing? So I could give a few examples of different combinations that I do like to use. Let's say if an individual is in an off season, they're looking to stay a little bit leaner on the leaner side of things, or bulk phase if a person's not a competitor. I would say I like to use MOTS-C simply because of the fact of the AMPK activation. I know there's a lot of controversy out there in social media about using MOTS-C when you are actually trying to build muscle, because AMPK is the opposite of mTOR, and all of a sudden that just means the gram of androgens that we're using is just not as stimulating muscle protein synthesis, which really doesn't make sense to me personally. I do believe peptides are very, very timing based. So yeah, maybe if you are using it pre-workout and before going and lifting weights, and you're doing your post-workout cardio, you're not having any essential amino acids, and you're a natural who isn't using any testosterone replacement therapy, for sure I could see that actually interfering with muscle growth and the actual processes of muscle growth as a whole. But let's say we're talking about this individual who's fully optimized from a hormonal standpoint, if not even above, with using testosterone, Equipoise, maybe a different compound as well, using growth hormone, using intra-workout carbs, using intra-workout essential amino acids. And then they're also spreading their cardio away from their training, where they may be doing cardio in like a fasted state, or maybe later in the day, using that MOTS-C around the actual cardio session as a whole. I've noticed specifically for a lot of individuals who used to be a little bit more insulin resistant whenever we got their food higher, have been able to stay a lot leaner this off season and this past year, and being able to stay a lot more insulin sensitive while we are pushing a lot more food. And I haven't noticed some muscle loss. If anything, Dom Kuza himself, who's one of my mentors and a person who's incredibly smart in the peptide space as a whole, he's shown me studies where MOTS-C actually does help promote muscle growth through some things in regards to myostatin and other different pathways as well, which I can't name off the top of my head right now. I'll have to go back and look at some of those studies. But based on that, there's two sides of a coin of using actual MOTS-C right there. So I would like to say I'm more on the side of being a little bit more optimistic of using it in actual growth phase as a whole. But I can for sure see the other side of a coin when we are looking at individuals who may not necessarily be in a hormonally optimized position as a whole. SLU is a funny one. It is a funny one to use in an off-season scenario. Reason I say that is because I did have somebody on my podcast last year who came on and basically said, and this is, I respect the guy fully, but he basically was kind of painting it as the devil, to kind of use it in the off season where it's going to impair all of your ability to utilize glucose, and you're not necessarily going to. And I just don't believe energy systems work in a vacuum that way. I
Mhm.
just don't necessarily see how that plays out. If anything, using a very, very low dose of SLU, I'm not talking 500 milligrams, I'm not talking even 5 milligrams, I'm talking 500 micrograms to maybe 1 milligram max, in a fasted window away from the workout as well. I've noticed for a lot of individuals have kept them in a really, really good spot in terms of blood glucose, in terms of body fat composition, and as a whole, endurance as well. Because I think if we are going to be talking about pushing up a little bit more size, we're looking about adding a little bit more muscle. There are things that do get impaired, and endurance is one of them. Breathing is one of them, and just feeling a little bit heavier. It regardless is going to put a little bit more stress on the body, and I do believe SLU is a good thing to counteract some of those stresses as a whole. And if anything, from a lipid standpoint, my LDL always stays below 60 whenever I'm using SLU. And I just talked about eating 7,000 calories a day, 160 grams of fat a day, and a cheat meal every single day. And I literally just got my blood work back last week and my LDL was like a 56. And
That's amazing.
that's absolutely absurd for me. And I really can't pin it down to anything besides using some of these mitochondrial peptides and perhaps the Increlex, but I'm not exactly sure how much of the Increlex itself is actually doing in terms of actual lipid metabolism as a whole. I'll have to use that in isolation away from the actual SLU to kind of get a good gauge on that as a whole. Those two things I really do like to use now. Retatrutide, this is also one that's kind of, the GLPs, from a coaching perspective, have been the most fascinating thing to actually witness, because the response is so insanely variant from person to person. I've had somebody come through my door using 20 milligrams of retatrutide a week, somebody who's
Yeesh.
well over 50, he's completely retired, doesn't have anything to do, and he just basically loves to do these sardine fasts on his own, and he's using 20 milligrams of retatrutide throughout that process. And you know, for me, 1 milligram will knock me out for a week. I won't be able to eat if I took 1 milligram, like at all, even in a deficit. 500 micrograms is really my spot for me, and I can't imagine using that in a growth phase setting. But I do have some people who have higher appetites who aren't necessarily people who are looking to compete. We don't have an issue with waist distension as a whole, because if this person is looking to look like a cartoon character, I'm assuming they don't want to take off their shirt on the beach. And no offense to this guy, but sorry, Dave Palumbo, but have Palumboism as a whole. If nobody knows what that is basically what people call growth gut, which I don't really believe is related to growth hormone as a whole. But retatrutide, I do believe, does have some issues around waist distension for certain competitors, which is the reason why I wouldn't necessarily use it in a growth phase for a lot of people, especially if that's a concern. But let's say it's the perfect scenario where somebody has a small waist, somebody has a higher appetite, and they respond pretty well to retatrutide, then I absolutely see no issue using a very small dose in a growth phase with that individual, with the contingency that we do have a period of coming off retatrutide before actually moving into the deficit. Now, when we come off retatrutide, we can switch it out for tirzepatide, we could switch it out for cagrilitide, or we could just cold turkey it completely during that kind of transition phase between actually growing and actually dieting as a whole. So with that being said, I believe it could be a good tool for the right individual. I just don't see it being the right tool for every single individual out there. And I do see it cause a lot of issues with a lot of people if they aren't necessarily aware of what their circumstance is in that specific scenario. So those are three right there. Now, GHKCU is something I love to use with a lot of people. It's something that I do believe it's not only great from an injury standpoint, but the main reason I use it is because of a lot of acne cases. A lot of people do come to me because they have crazy, crazy acne from gear use, and I believe GHKCU isn't going to be a fix. It's not a fix. I don't want anybody to say GHKCU fixed my acne. It's a band-aid. You come off it, you're going to get the same acne. It's not going to change your long-term propensity to get acne. It's probably a gut issue, maybe it's inflammation issue, maybe it's a diet issue, maybe it's genetic, maybe it's hormonal. We got to find out what the root cause is. But while we find out what the root cause is, we could use that GHKCU to just kind of band-aid it, keep your skin clear while you're on cycle. And then, when we ever do go into like a cruise or what people call a health phase nowadays, we could use that, kind of period of time to do a little bit more discovery on what's going on in the background in terms of your actual health as a whole. So those are the main peptides I use with people. I don't really experiment too far out of it besides the oral BPC, oral KPV for gut issues. I have used LL37 in some cases for some severe like parasite issues, or even, whatchamacallit. So at the tip of my head, uh, mold toxicity. Why did that just completely slip my brain? But yeah, I've
Dude, I
used
have blanked on so much random shit before. So it's like people hopefully realize that when you essentially talk for a living that we're not nonstop. But no, mold
yeah,
issues it's tremendous for that. Absolutely. I do
absolutely.
want to not to cut you off, but I do
Go
want to
ahead.
circle back to something that you did mention. And it's basically your process of alternative use case. And it might not be labeled as such, but that comes down to something that I'm borderline ranting about it every day now, and it's understanding how things work. Because when you understand something beyond the level of this drug does this, but you understand this is the process through which this drug does that thing, then you can take advantage and leverage that process for anything that process might be beneficial to. And I say it all the time. I'm trying not to be a broken record on the I hate just constant pimping of peptide codes from people that don't understand them, because there's companies trying to make money and I get it. And these things obviously can benefit people. And realistically, there's not that many people right now fucking themselves up with peptides. And realistically, I'm very optimistic about the long-term stuff. There will be things that we find out that, hey, long-term, this one in this dose is doing this, and that's not great. Like law of averages, that will happen. But there's not the tremendous risk that people are saying it could be looming out there for just peptides and small molecules as a whole. I just don't buy it, just based on the strength of these chemical signals, what we are seeing happen, what we can predict would happen in the future from it. There needs to be that room for theoretical, hey, based on this process, this could happen. And it goes all the way back to growth hormone and cancer. But I don't really have any knowledge of anybody that's ever said, like, hey, I have cancer now and it's because of this growth hormone. It's definitive for this reason. Even that doesn't exist, and it's been a while. But that's not me saying everything's safe. That's me saying that when you understand how something works, it can be applied differently. So you mentioned like Retta and SLU in a bulking situation, and I've been utilizing low doses of Retta and SLU with a pretty large number of people during their reverse dieting phase. And I'm taking advantage of nutrient partitioning. I'm taking advantage of being able to slowly titrate food up while I might be turning the doses, even the micro doses, down on these. I'm using these for things like the the increased HSL, hormone sensitive lipase, that you get from the glucagon constituent of retatrutide. There's so many things that if you understand that, and unfortunately, I'm not saying that you and I are the smartest people on the planet. We're not the only people that know what hormone sensitive lipase is, but there's not that many people, when you look at all the people saying, hey, retatrutide's awesome, you should buy it, that do. But when you do, you can apply it in those different cases. The low dose SLU and its utilization of glycogen, or glycogen sparing, I should say. I'm not familiar with the person that said that on the podcast, so I'll speak a little bit more candidly about it, but I'll still be respectful because everybody has a thought process, and who am I to say that thought process is wrong? I might not be trying to take a bunch of SLU long term in mega doses if I'm, taking in 1,000 grams of carbohydrates per day. But we've also seen it demonstrated that SLU will allow your body to utilize glucose for energy when you need it. And also, if you understand the Krebs cycle, if it didn't, it would kill you. Now, long
Literally.
term, chronic stress on that system, making it harder for your body to switch to glucose, theoretically could drive ROS up really, really high, drive a massive state of oxidative stress, and then drive inflammation as a whole, which could drive to a bunch of other things. But you understand that when you understand how the cells make energy. And I'll say bold statement right now, if you're recommending peptides to anybody and you don't know what the Krebs cycle is, fuck you. fucking Google it, read it, like read a little bit about it. It's complicated, but it's not impossible to grasp. But again, this is just demonstrating everything that you just went over. Hey, I just do this, and these are some options, and these are the things that I like to do. You're demonstrating an understanding of how things work, which basically, when people start saying, oh, that guy's a wizard with nutrition or with peptides or with drugs, that's what that is. It's understanding how it works. It's understanding what it will do beneath the hood and how we can leverage that to different goals. I love the fact that you pointed out that these are the things that I stay within too, because that's also an example of staying in your wheelhouse. A lot of people are hesitant to admit that they don't know everything. If I hired a coach and then realized this guy actually knows everything and has it memorized, if he's only charging me even 10 grand a month and he's the guy that knows everything, there's something fucking going on here, because the guy that knows everything should be a fucking trillionaire. But we have networks, we have access to information. We can look things up and extrapolate the data that we need faster than most other people can, because it's the area that we work in. And again, we have an understanding of how things work. And the fact that you're demonstrating this at such a young age, you're not a kid, but I mean, Jesus Christ, if I was, and I said this to Paul the other day too, and I truly mean it for both of you. If I was where you were at your at that age, I butchered that sentence, but it got the point across.
Yep.
Dear God, in my 40s now, like I'd be so much further ahead than where I was now. So that's the importance of
Thank you.
understanding, not this drug's good for this, because that's a dime a dozen. When we talk about an oversaturated coaching market, that's what it's oversaturated with. This is the perfect example of the cream will rise to the top, but why will it? This is why. Let's pivot a little bit. How does your course building change when it's a female? Because now we're dealing with an incredibly delicate system.
Absolutely. Now, this is very, very interesting. I actually really do love working with enhanced females because of the amount of misinformation out there. I had a figure competitor come to me last year that would have put a lot of male cycles to shame. Like the very, very high doses of testosterone. I'm talking multiple hundreds of milligrams for a regional first time competitor, figure competitor, which is insane that we're still at the point where men are treating women like small men whenever they are putting their cycles together, and they're just like, I use this, you could just use half of it because you're half my size, so you're fine, just get away with it. That's not how it works whatsoever. The female system is incredibly delicate, and I always want to go in with the understanding of what that individual is looking to get out of the process with anybody, but specifically women, because I don't want to be the coach that holds you back. If you are the person who wants to be that, individual who wants to be a physique competitor or a women's bodybuilder. But what I will tell you is I'm probably not the coach for you. I'm not the person who's going to be willing to take you that route. I rather much work at the ground, at the grassroots level of individuals who are looking to stay a little bit more on the feminine side of things and stay within a certain realm of what I'm comfortable kind of recommending to certain individuals. Now, to actually put this into X's and O's, I think peptides have a lot more use case in actual women than they do in men, because I believe that we have a lot more to exhaust going the non-androgen route for females before we actually do start delving into the realms of TRT or Anavar or Primobolan, if anybody could find Primo these days. With that being said, I do believe things like MOTS-c, things like SLU, things like retatrutide, things like clenbuterol, even at a very, very low dose, all are things that I rather use. Growth hormone, insulin, even are things I much rather use with a female before we even dive into TRT. Now, with that being said, it really does also depend on the speed of what that individual is trying to get to their goals. If you're a bikini competitor trying to get on stage next year, you're 100% natural right now, or if you're a woman who wants to look like this cartoon character within a year, we may have the escalation from non-androgens to androgens a little bit quicker. We may not necessarily milk everything out of what we could get the non-androgen route before we go into the actual androgen route, because again, speed of results is what you're looking for. And we also understand that within the context of what we're going to be using with the androgens, we are going to keep virilization at the top of our mind. It's going to be the first thing I want you to send me in terms of your check-ins is how did your voice pitch change on your voice pitch analyzer? What was, we do have to have different conversations that can be a little bit uncomfortable, but what are you experiencing in terms of side effects as a whole? Are you experiencing body hair growth? Are you experiencing any of these things? Because some women aren't even educated on what the side effects of virilization even are. Some women do not understand that your clitoris can actually grow from using higher androgens. Some women don't understand that body hair growth is a side effect of androgens. So they could be experiencing some of these different things, and they just think it's something going on with their diet, or maybe they're feeling some sort of dysfunction or whatever. Their hormones are off, but they don't understand what's actually going on, like you said, under the hood, and actually understanding what's going on at a physiological level. So once we move past the peptide route, I think testosterone replacement therapy, especially if using androgens is something that you're planning on doing long term, is probably the smartest route to go. If you're looking to do a couple cycles, which, let's be honest, nobody really does only a couple cycles, male or female. We could do Anavar, we could do Primobolan, and we could just do short bursts of that over the course of a year. Call it a day. You saw out your goal, and you realize this isn't for you whatsoever, and you just realize you don't want to be enhanced anymore. Cool. But if you're a person who has big goals, if fitness has already been a big part of your life for multiple different years, and you're a person who has this deep desire to take your physique to the next level, then I believe going the testosterone replacement therapy route is the smartest, because it's what's going to allow us to get results long term. The issue with cycles, especially with women, is if we don't have some sort of testosterone replacement in the background, not only do we not necessarily have the physiological supply of testosterone, or whatever else it supplies alongside with that, estrogen, DHT, which are obviously testosterone aromatizes less in women, and they do get a little bit more of their estrogen from other routes. But with that being said, I do believe that people overprescribe TRT for women very commonly. TRT starts in whenever I recommend it at 3 milligrams. And we slowly titrate up there based on blood work, based on need, and based on side effects. The goal with using testosterone is something that we can stay on long term without experiencing any virilization. That is the goal of using testosterone replacement therapy. It's not, oh, we're going to be using this and then you're slowly going to virilize over the course of years. That's not necessarily what we're trying to do with testosterone replacement therapy. It's like, no, I don't want you to experience any virilization from this dose. I just want this to be a background player that goes, just goes on like white noise in the background. We plug it in. We don't have to worry about it. We don't have to worry about your testosterone dipping when you're dieting. We don't have to worry about any of these different things, because it's just going to be stable.
And that's 3 milligrams per
week.
Exactly. So put that in contrast. Anybody watching this that has worked with anybody that just said, hey, 200 milligrams a test sounds like a good blast for you. 3 per week. Per week.
Yes. I've heard, clinics starting women off at 20 milligrams a week. And, it's just absolutely absurd. I've never really seen a woman handle 20 milligrams a week without having any sort of virilization. And again, the goal is to experience zero virilization. From there, we could go the DHT route. Anavar is going to be something I'm a little bit more, especially in this day and age, in this climate, with actually acquiring PEDs, I'm a little bit more willing to go the Anavar route versus Primobolan. Reason being is because it's an oral, it's something that we can plug in, and we know that we can pull it out if we ever do have virilization. The issue with Primo is because of the enanthate ester as a whole, it's going to have some carryover in terms of whenever we do pull it out, it's not just immediately out of your system. We're going to have a couple weeks with that androgen still kicking around in the background, and it's still going to be something that we're going to have a little bit more concern about, in terms of compounding, in terms of virilization, if you do start to experience any sort of rapid virilization as a whole. Last thing I will mention is MPP. MPP is something that is, physiologically produced within the women's physiology whenever they do go through pregnancy, obviously at a very microscopic amount. But I do notice that MPP tends to be very well tolerated in some women. Not every woman, just like not with every man. The 19 Nors are definitely one of the more variants in terms of actual results as a whole. But I do believe MPP, if the woman does tolerate it well, they respond to it really, really well. And I'm talking like very, very, very good muscle gain, very, very good tissue accrual, very, very minimal water retention compared to what you may see with a man. And I do notice as a whole training performance goes through the roof in these women who do respond well to MPP as a whole, compared even to Anavar or Primobolan. The last one I'll mention as Turinabol. Now, this is one that is a weird use case because I don't hear a lot of coaches talking about using Turinabol with women, but this is something that I learned from Broderick Chavez from taking some of his courses and actually doing a mentorship way back when. But he kind of mentioned combining Turinabol with Anavar and it being like a 1+1=3 effect. With that being said, I have seen that. I have seen using 2.5 milligrams of Turinabol. Yes, 2.5 milligrams of Turinabol with 2.5 milligrams of Anavar, and just using that pre-workout 5 times per week with the testosterone base in the background, being very, very effective in terms of results and very minimal in terms of virilization in general, because there are women who aren't going to even be able, prefacing this entire conversation, which I should have done at the very start, there are going to be some women who cannot handle 1 milligram of testosterone. There are going to be women who cannot handle 1 milligram of Anavar like a week. Like there are women who have crazy responses and are just going to virilize, and they're just not necessarily going to be able to go down the PED route or the androgen route the way some other women are. So with that all being said, this is in general. I don't want any woman out there to use 2.5 milligrams and 2.5 milligrams of that and expect not to virilize at all. I do want everybody to even come into this discussion with the understanding that this is risk-based. We can't 100% mitigate virilization as a whole. What we can do is do our best to put the plan on paper for you to kind of minimize that risk as a whole. But if you're coming into this world, you understand that you could be that 1% individual who's just not going to be able to respond well to any of these compounds, and this is just not going to be the right route for you. So like that's with any drug as a whole. There's going to be that one outlier who's just not going to be able to take it. I can't drink alcohol. I am half Asian. I have Asian flesh. If I have one drink, I am going to be literally acting like a complete idiot, straight up. So alcohol is not a drug for me. It's absolutely not. And I accept that. And I think a lot more people need to be accepting of their physiology and also understanding that none of these general things that are said on the internet should be applicable to every single individual. It's always individual based as a whole.
Agreed with you 1000% on that. Now, we're going to go with a closing question that I'll say in advance, incredibly individualistic. And this is going to be obviously tailored towards a young man that is already optimized. Let's say we throw this scenario at you. You can only use, outside of optimized testosterone, one anabolic, one fat burner, one general performance enhancer, and let's say one not anabolic, so not a DHT or a 19 Nor, muscular enhancing product of
Okay.
any kind. So, steroid other than testosterone, fat burner, performance enhancer, something that will actually drive performance in the gym,
Okay.
and something else to grow muscle. You can only, once you pick these, use these four in various doses, but you only have access to these things forever. Just bullet point list. Which ones?
Can I ask one question beforehand? Is health a concern in this?
Yes.
Okay, okay, okay. I would say other than testosterone, equipoise, because I do believe it's very diverse. You could use it in both the cutting phase, you could use it in an off-season phase, and I do believe, but just because it doesn't necessarily hold as much water, it does have the propensity to control estrogen through actually converting E2 into estrone. It's not the same as the way DHT derivative is going to necessarily control estrogen as a whole. Equipoise, fantastic. Performance enhancer, for me personally, I like Anavar. It is mild. It is driving exactly what I want from a muscle contraction standpoint, from an aggression standpoint in the gym, and from a strength standpoint. 50 milligrams, 25 milligrams of Anavar for me personally has always worked tremendously well. I've even done 10 milligrams of Anavar at the very start of my journey, and I noticed a lot out of that very small dose. It was pharmaceutical, which I do believe does make a little bit of a difference with Anavar. The one compound I do believe really does make a difference, pharmaceutical versus underground, is Anavar. So I would go the Anavar route. Um, Non-androgen that is muscle building would be growth hormone. I would say growth hormone. I mean, I think that's a pretty obvious one. I was going to say Increlex, but I do believe growth hormone, for me personally, has always been one that's worked fantastically well. And I'm not willing to fork up the money for Increlex, or we don't know the risk of running Increlex, year round for the rest of your life. People run growth hormone year round for their entire lives and are perfectly fine at a lower dose of like 1 and 2 IUs. Let's see, fat burner. Clenbuterol for very low dose, for me personally, works really well. 20 micrograms of clenbuterol is something that I respond really well to, and I don't really get a big heart rate increase out of, and I get a lot of fat loss out of. I have never really pushed above 60 micrograms of clenbuterol in my entire life. So I'll lie. I accidentally used one of those liquid droppers, and I took 200 micrograms once, and that was the last time I'll make that mistake. But for the most part, I will use 20 micrograms of clenbuterol, get all the benefits out of it with the least amount of side effects in terms of increased heart rate as a whole. Is there one I'm missing on that list?
Nope. Those were kind of
Okay,
like the
perfect.
four
Yep, there
pillars
we
of
go.
that. Awesome. So awesome answer too. And if anybody kind of notices there wasn't anything in there that's like fringe or flavor of the month or like, holy shit, I've never even heard of that.
Yep.
Tried and true is sometimes the best way to go about it. And again, there is reasoning as to why those were the performance enhancers that were chosen. Tom, this has been fantastic, man. It's so nice to be able to pick your brain because you're usually in the chair that I'm in doing the picking of the brains.
Yeah.
And I always find it fascinating to speak to people that not only have their own thought process and their understanding, but somebody that does have constant exposure to all these varying thought processes and specialties, and people that focus only on training or only on PEDs or only on steroids or only on peptides. Because I really do feel that when you're the type of person that's hungry for knowledge and information, that type of exposure just creates a thought process in and of itself. And again, I'm so impressed by what you put out there now. I can only imagine 10 years from now it's going to be fucking insane. We'll have to
Thank
have you back on and just pick a specific topic and just hammer that one. But I did want everybody that might not be familiar with you to be able to see how multifaceted that you are. If anybody is now wanting to absorb more of your content and they want to check out your podcast, which I don't see why anybody wouldn't after this, but if they want
you.
your content, your podcast, Instagram, just educational information, they want to inquire about coaching, where do we find you?
Coach Tom Schuster over on YouTube, and at T Schuster Fit over on Instagram. And Drew, I just want to say you're a humongous fucking inspiration for me, man. I have to say, from the amount of podcasts I watch with you, you're always a person I try to aspire towards. Not only the information that you put out, but the way that you're able to be a rational voice in an industry full of individuals who are just trying to make a quick buck or just try to put other people in the industry down. You're a person I truly, truly do respect because the content that you put out is applicable, it's helpful, and it doesn't necessarily leave room for a lot of those haters or people to come in and just be able to. I'm sure you get them, but people would just come around and just try to ruin people's day. I do feel like you are truly building a community full of people who are positive. I'm over in your school community all the time learning myself. So I really, really do want to thank you personally for having me on the podcast. You're a person I respect truly in the industry. And I love to say that we are in an industry full of cynics and optimists. And I like to think that both you and I are a little bit more on the optimistic side of things. And I really do want to see, these compounds, this information, these different training methodologies truly help people at the end of the day. And that's why we give out free information. So I like to thank you. And I also want to say that you're a massive inspiration for me, man.
Brother, when all is said and done and the game is over, you will have surpassed everything that I managed to achieve. And I truly do believe that. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the DDT Method Podcast. We will see you next time.